Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Ned Dennison. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. I have a special guest with us today, Sophie Etheridge. Will you please say hello, Sophie?
Hello.
Sophie set an English Channel record the other week. It was the longest swim on record, replacing Jackie Coble. She also runs an active, effective Facebook group called Adaptive Athlete. And so what I'd like to do is like to get into it all. Sophie, first of all, tell us about your new record. I know it's not official yet, but give us the details.
So I wasn't aiming for a record. I was aiming not to get the record. But it took 29 hours and 4 minutes for me to swim across the English Channel, which is a really long time. Still recovering from it, but yeah, it's a bit bizarre and overwhelming still that it was a record.
So how did you build up physically and mentally in the last couple of years for this?
So I mean, in the last couple of years, in 2021, I did Windermere two-way. It was originally meant to be the year before, but because of COVID, I ended up postponing because I hadn't done enough training. And for Windermere, I found almost a sweet spot in my training in the way that I was doing it. So around health conditions and just busy daily life. So I was focusing on working the pool and building speed and technique and endurance. But then at the weekends, every weekend, I would do a long swim, normally in Peterborough Lido or in the river. And each week gradually increased that long swim distance. So I knew that worked, and that gave me a really good foundation. Then last year did a English Channel relay swim with the Hastings Voluntary Lifeguards. And it felt almost easy because it was only swimming for an hour, and the conditions were absolutely fantastic. It was like swimming in a swimming pool. And then eventually found out in sort of November time that the STA were going to fund my English Channel solo swim. After talking to a few people at the conference, and pretty much went back to a very similar setup that I did for my Windermere two-way swim. I worked really hard in the pool, especially over winter, but stayed acclimatized. So I swam through winter in just my normal wet swimming costume, swim hat, goggles. And then when it got to about April, started adding in those longer swims and was doing 1 or 2 long swims a week. Towards May, June time, it started being that I was doing 1 long river swim and 1 long Lido swim, because they were the only places where you could swim for that length of time. But actually the longest swim I did was actually only 6 hours. But that was because I knew mentally that I could do that longer distance and swim for that longer amount of time because I'd had that experience from when I did Windermere two-way. So it was reassuring to have that in sort of my swim bank and knowledge, if you like. But it was building it up in the same way, and I've just found the way that works for me in terms of training.
So for the viewers, Windermere two-way is about 35 kilometers. It is leg-draggingly fresh water. There's no buoyancy in that place at all, and I'm convinced there's a toenail magnet dragging your feet down. And then, when you were going for the English Channel, the conventional wisdom is you don't think about the time, you just keep moving your arms, and when you get there, you get there. You weren't planning on breaking Jackie's record. Did you have a number in mind and start to go, no, it's gone past the 1-day mark or whatever it is?
So whenever anyone asked me how long it was going to take, I said, well, it depends on all the conditions and everything, but maximum 20 hours. That was my real tops, but I was aiming for sort of about 18. And I would have been happy with I said I'd be happy with anything under 20 hours. And somehow in the middle of the swim, when it got to 20 hours, and I didn't realize it was 20 hours, obviously, because I didn't have a watch on or anything, I stopped and had quite a serious conversation with my crew. And I was like, look, I need to actually know how long I've been in the water, because I'm really starting to sort of lag a little bit. I'm getting tired, little bit of cold on and off. And they said, are you sure you want to know? And I was like, yeah. And they said, you've been in for 20 hours. And I was like, but that was my tops. But it's okay. I'll go to 24, then I've swum for a whole day. And I just kept swimming. And they were like, okay, right, we'll just, yeah. I think if they told me I'd got to 24, I'd have really questioned whether to carry on or not. But thankfully they didn't.
So, Sophie, I give my crew written directions to lie to me. So if
Yeah.
I come in, they would have said, you've only been in for 16 hours, Ned, not 20.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that we'd sort of done that all the way through until that point, and it was, I literally stopped and we had this actually had a serious conversation, because I was like, I've never swum anywhere near this length of time, starting to feel a bit cold. I'm sure that I'm going backwards. My mouth was hurting. I was starting to struggle with taking feeds because my throat was so sore and everything. And it was I don't know quite how many more hours I can go on for, but if it's only like a couple more hours, then yeah, why not? Might as well. I'm not getting out like an hour before, 2 hours before I finish.
And were you fresher after you took your couple of naps out there?
Say that again?
Were you fresher after you took your nap out there?
Not really. So it was a bit weird because I kept swimming even though I fell asleep. And all of a sudden I just sort of, so on sea satin there's like a pontoon on the back, and I smashed my head on it, and was like, oh, okay, hello. And my crew was like, are you right? I was like, I think I just fell asleep. And they're like, right. I was like, you've heard of sleepwalking? Walking's difficult for me, swimming's a lot easier. Yeah.
And did the little jellyfish come up and kiss you all over while you're out there at any time?
Yes. So in the separation zone, there were lots of little tiny, and I mean tiny, moon jellyfish. And they were quite pretty to watch because it was sort of getting dark. So there was the purpley blue glowy almost. But as soon as we got into French waters, I don't know what kind they were. And thankfully it was dark. Because otherwise I think I'd have freaked out a bit. And I got quite badly stung. It was only afterwards, a couple of days later, when I spoke to my crew, and they said to me that they were trying to not look nervous about the number of jellyfish that were around me. Because I swam through huge smacks of jellyfish, but I managed to not get stung in the big groups of them. And it was when there was the odd one or two, and I would just put my hands straight into them and swim directly into them. So yeah, there were quite a few. But thankfully I couldn't see them.
Well, not always the case. I find that in strong direct sunlight, which we don't have a lot of in Ireland, the jellyfish are down, but come nighttime, they all come up to the surface.
See, when I did my relay last year, it was the other way around. So at the height of the sun, all the jellyfish came up. So we only had jellyfish for sort of 3-4 hours in the middle of the day last year. So I was expecting them during the day.
Okay.
And there weren't any. I was like, this is going to be great. There's no jellyfish. How lucky. And I'd heard from people that have done the channel this year that they didn't see very many apart from sort of in the separation zone. I was like, oh, okay, we'll be fine. Once I'm through the separation zone, we'll be all good. And then it was night and it was just hundreds of them. But yeah, I was very glad I couldn't actually see them.
Was that your first night swim of that kind of duration?
No. So it's the first time I've swum 2 nights in a row. So for Windermere, I think I did about 4 or 5 hours in the dark. But I've never done a whole night. So obviously I started 22 minutes past midnight, so I did the whole night. And then when I landed, the sun was coming up. I think it was about 5:30 or something in the morning. So I actually ended up swimming through 2 nights.
So for the viewers, if you start to swim at 3 o'clock in the morning and the sunrise is supposed to be 6 o'clock or something, it actually gives you an emotional uplift.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether there's sun or not. It gets kind of light or steely gray. Swimming into the night can be emotionally horrible because you know you've got a long, long time.
That's so when it started, the conversation with over the 20 hours bit, I was like, it's starting to get dark. I should have finished by now. It's not meant to be getting dark. Why is it getting dark again?
So you had the double
which is
whammy.
when I stopped, and it was the one time, and I was like, I don't know that I can make it through a night from
You had the two things hit you. This is taking longer than I thought, and it's
yeah,
getting dark. That's
yeah.
not a good combination.
No, and it was so when I did Windermere, I actually wore a wetsuit when I did Windermere. And it was at night that I really all of a sudden felt the cold. But the previous night when I was on the set in my English Channel swim, I hadn't actually suffered with the cold at all, but the wind had picked up. So the reason that I stopped and said, look, how long have I been in, was because I was starting to get a bit cold because of the wind, because it was just on my arms and my head, and that's what gets me. It's not the cold water that I suffer with, it's the wind that makes me cold. So yeah, it was a bit nerve-wracking swimming into the second night, especially when I wasn't expecting to have to swim into the next night, so I hadn't mentally prepared myself to swim into the night. But it was nice that the sun was coming up as I landed.
Oh yeah.
So I landed in daylight still. It just took an extra day.
I'd like to change the subject a tiny bit if I could. The International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame adopted a formal initiative back in March 2019 to identify and promote swimmers and contributors with physical disabilities and our honorees who've assisted in their goals. And over the last 4 years, we've logged about 150 actions that we've taken to bring a positive spotlight, to talk about the challenges. And you and I spoke a long time ago, it seems like, and I always understood the challenge of, there's a steep set of stairs going down to the beach, or there's a ladder that scares me going down from a big seawall or something. You said something to me that really hit a nerve, and I think about it probably every week. And you said, those things everybody understands, but you don't understand that is when I go to the supermarket, the checkout lane might be too tight for my wheelchair. And even if it isn't, the machine for the credit card or the phone can be too high to reach. And
Yeah.
it's something that I never would have thought of. So I find that every time I go to a supermarket now and I'm checking out, I kind of assess it. I'm quite a tall guy, so it isn't my issue. But tell us a little bit about your physical disability, how it impacts you in the water, plus how do you get in and out? So your English Channel relay, for example, after your hour, you need to get out.
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a couple of conditions. The main one that affects me is called complex regional pain syndrome, which is a neurological chronic pain condition. So when you get an injury, mine was a sprained ankle after being hit by a car when I was on my bike. And it's when your nervous system sends pain signals because you've got an injury, and then obviously your nervous system stops sending those pain signals as the injury improves. With CRPS, it doesn't improve, so it gets stuck sending those pain messages continuously. So even though there's no actual physical injury, you get that pain plus that pain intensified. So for me, it spread to both legs. So I've got it in both legs from about halfway down my thigh. But it's much worse on my left leg and around my left ankle, which was my initial injury site. So actually wearing a wetsuit or even wearing normal trousers, I have to be really careful when I'm choosing which trousers I'm going to buy, because they've got to be really soft and as soft as possible, because otherwise it hurts my legs because of the contact. So they're really, really hypersensitive. So when I did Windermere, I trained myself to wear a wetsuit, which I now can't do anyway. But during my English Channel swim, obviously I didn't have the issue with the wetsuit, but I had the issue of the waves, and the waves throwing my legs all over the place. And I figured out a few tricks to try and help, because I can't kick my legs, so they literally just bob along behind me, which some people's do anyway because they choose not to kick their legs. But what I was doing at one point, especially when the wind picked up and it was quite rough, was I was using my better leg to support my worse leg. So I was effectively swimming cross-legged. So my legs were out straight, but my right leg was supporting my left leg, meaning that it wasn't getting thrown around quite so much, to just try and reduce that pain. I had pain medication throughout the swim. I managed to, we worked it out, if the swim had gone the way that it was meant to and didn't take 29 hours, we worked it out and I didn't need to take a full dose of my normal medication, which includes really strong controlled pain medication. I wouldn't need to take that in the middle of the channel, but because it took longer, we had to try and figure out in the middle of the channel how I was going to take sort of 7-8 tablets in one go.
Okay.
And they sort of disintegrate and go mushy and gross. But because it took so long, I had to. The other real issue in the English Channel was the jellyfish again. So any injury, knock, or anything to my left leg particularly causes my leg to go into spasm, basically. So it just, all the muscles tighten and I just pretty much lose control over it. It just does what it wants. My foot turns in and gets stuck and it can get really, really painful. And it did in the middle of the English Channel when I got a jellyfish sting on it. And it was one of the biggest challenges for me with the English Channel was overcoming that pain, knowing that that pain in my leg, it's real pain, but it's not actually doing me any damage. And mentally, I've sort of prepared myself. You get used to it when you live with the condition anyway, but it really takes it to the extreme when you're in the middle of the channel being thrown all over the place. The other thing I did to help it was when it got windy, as odd as it sounds, I opened my legs so I didn't get thrown all over the place. So it almost made me a bigger surface area and object, so I wasn't being thrown all over the place. Yep. But it makes it really weird swimming with your legs wide open. It's almost like swimming doing a star float. So obviously it's not the most efficient way to swim. But at one point in the swim, I only knew it after talking to my crew later. They got quite concerned about me because I started sort of bending and moving my legs around and all I was doing was stretching. But from their position, all of a sudden my feet were bending upright and they were like, what's going on? Well, is everything okay?
So for the viewers, I encourage you next time you're in the pool, the ocean, swim 100 meters with your legs crossed, not kicking crossed, but crossed in position. Swim 100 meters with your legs apart, and then try to swim 5 meters with your knee bent and your foot in the air. And you'll get some small appreciation for what Sophie is experiencing, some tiny bit of appreciation.
Yeah, I mean, the bit that suffered more than anything and that I'm still struggling with is my back and my core, because obviously my core when my legs are crossed, my core holds me up and makes me float. Whereas I had an issue with my shoulder in the middle of the swim, but I've not had issues. They're tight, obviously, because I've swum for 29 hours. But they're not painful in the way that my back is and my core is. And it was almost like I'd done 1,000 sit-ups the next day, and I couldn't physically just sit up. I had to pull myself up because my core, it was just destroyed.
Well, you swam in a different body position, which you hadn't trained in extensively. And we have the same problem when we go from salt to fresh. Body position changes and this mysterious pain in the back appears. And it never goes away. And people who go from fresh to salt, even though they have the buoyancy, it's different. And their body isn't used to it. So talk about the relay. How did you physically get in and out?
So we did lots of risk assessments and things in advance. And I was quite lucky in that. So the first English Channel relay I did, I was only about 15 or 16. And I ended up not swimming because I ended up so seasick. I was seasick before we even got out of Dover Harbour, and was seasick the whole way to France and the whole way back, to the point I didn't actually see France because I was that ill. So the relay was with the same, it was with the same organisation. So again, I was invited back basically to redeem myself from the shame of the first one. That's how I saw it anyway. But it meant that someone that I've known since I was sort of 15, I mean, one of the people on the boat taught me to swim. So it was, they knew me very well, but didn't know me with my physical disability. And we had lots of discussions in advance. And also with Tanya and Lance, who were on the boat. And CSATing works quite well for me. So although I don't have normal sensation in my legs, they do work. So the muscles are there and they do work physically, but I can't always tell where they are and what they're doing. So what we did in the end was one of the blokes on the team went down the ladder on the back of CSATing, and there's a platform at the bottom. And he stood to the side of the ladder on the platform. And I went down the ladder and he had his hand behind my legs and was guiding my feet to the steps and saying, yeah, now you can step down. Yeah, now you can step down, till we got to the bottom. And then I could just slide in off the pontoon at the bottom. So it worked really well.
And calm water, that's wonderful.
Oh yeah, it's a bit more tricky when it's a bit rough, we discovered. But because it had worked so well, I went on the same boat again for my solo. But I didn't really have any issues during the relay because it was just like swimming in a swimming pool, because it was so flat and so calm. You could sit on the pontoon and actually just sit and watch the sea, because there was no water coming over the pontoon or anything, because it was just so calm over the platform. And we did a similar thing on the way out. There's a loop underneath the platform, so I could put my foot in and I had one person each side grab my arms, help me up. I grabbed onto the ladder, and then I did the same thing on the way up, and there were people at the top of the ladder that helped me get back to where I was sitting. The solo was a bit more complicated. Getting down was fine. It was rougher than it was before in my relay, but again, I had, this time it was Mike Goody, who's actually an amputee himself, but he had a leg that has a pin in or something. I don't understand the prosthetics and things. But he was able to, we'd had several discussions in advance of what we were going to try and do. And he did the same thing on the way down, and it worked perfectly. It was great. Really nice and easy. It was in the dark, so it was a bit more complicated, but absolutely fine. Getting back in after swimming for 29 hours was a little more tricky. And I think it took pretty much everyone in the crew.
You weren't used to being vertical.
Well, that was one of the issues, yeah. And I was just utterly exhausted, funnily enough.
I sometimes crewing before the thing, I kind of ask permission or forgiveness to say to the young woman or older woman, by the way, at a certain point, if I need to, I'm going to have my hands on your backside, pressing you up a ladder. Like,
yeah.
Apologies in advance. I need to, it's going to happen.
Pretty much was that. So I landed in Calais, which is the longest beach I swear I've ever been on in my life, because I had to crawl out. And the pilot said, no, you've got to keep going. You're not at the water yet. Keep going. No, you're not at the water yet. Keep going. And it went on forever and ever. But he had taken the little tender boat, the rib boat, in because it was so shallow. So I managed to get into the rib boat, not particularly elegantly. It was more sort of like bend and flop. So it was a bit interesting, but Lance was trying to support me with his knee whilst driving the boat and getting the boat going, which was on the sand. And he was like, can you push the boat? And I went, no, just no. But we got back to the boat, and I on the journey back from the shore to the main boat, I suddenly thought, I was like, how the hell am I going to get back on the boat? Because we had
in the water and back up.
I was like, how am I even going to get on the platform, let alone on the boat? And in the end, there were, if I remember rightly, there was one member of crew on one side of the ladder, one on the other side of the ladder behind me, and I sort of knelt and shuffled onto the platform, and they then helped me by lifting me up basically by my arm, under my arms, to get me holding onto the ladder. And they then sort of, one guided my foot and one pushed me up this ladder. And there were people at the top waiting to pull me up the ladder. And I ended up on my knees at the top, and they were like, right, we'll get you up onto the seat. And I just went, no, I'm staying on the floor. If I stay on the floor, I can't fall any further. I'm as low as I can go. I'm staying on the floor.
Now, Sophie, it may put a smile on your face to realize that lots of people without a physical disability have exactly the same issue getting back in the boat.
Yeah. Yeah, it was painful and challenging. So when the guy that was helping to guide my feet on the ladder, I'd just totally forgotten to say not to touch my feet. You can touch sort of my calves, but not my foot. And he grabbed my ankle halfway up the ladder, and I screamed. And then I was, of course, halfway up a ladder, and it actually took my breath away completely. And I was like, I need to stop. And they were like, you can't stop, you're halfway up a ladder. And I went, I don't care. I was like, just don't do that again. Please don't do that again.
I would have thought you'd have run out of pain by then.
It was not pleasant at the end of a swim.
You run a very active Facebook page. Tell us a little bit about your page, your group, and I'm interested in knowing about successes you've had.
So I think it was just before in 2020, late 2020, after I'd had to cancel my postpone my two-way Windermere swim. I'd still done some swimming events, and I basically got fed up of being the only person with a physical disability that you could see at events. And I assumed that there must be more people out there than just me, but there weren't people. There was nothing, no community or anything for us to be able to actually give each other tips and advice on getting in and out, and how to deal with event organizers and all those sorts of things with training around health issues. So I started a Facebook group with 8 of my friends, I think 7 of which didn't actually swim, but all had a disability, just to try and get something going. And it was shared in one of the main open water UK swimming Facebook groups, and it really took off. So it's called the Adaptive and Disabled Open Water Swimmers Group, and I'm hoping to turn it into a charity now that I've done my channel swim and have a little bit more time to chill and do things. But we've now got nearly 1,000 people in the community, and it's just become a really lovely place. So absolutely everyone's welcome. They don't have to have a disability. So we've got people with disabilities, all sorts of disabilities, all different ages, from all over the world. And we've also got swimming coaches and event organisers and people swim buddies and all sorts of things. And it gives them a platform and somewhere to actually ask people with disabilities that are suffering with the issues and struggling with certain things, how it can be improved to make it more accessible and more inclusive. So from that, a lot of work has come my way from it. So I now write about disability in open water swimming in the Outdoor Swimmer magazine and things. But it was through that I ended up being in contact with the Swimming Teachers Association. And I gave the first ever talk at the conference last year on accessibility in open water swimming. And a lot of that talk came from me speaking to the people in the community and saying, look, what is it that you need? What would make it accessible? And it's been a real learning curve and really interesting for me, just in general, to see the different issues that people have. So one of the main things is actually not getting into the water, it's getting to the water in the first place. So it's not the entry points that they have difficulties with, it's walking across the field to get to the entry point. So for me, I'm by the River Ouse, so most of it's grass when you go into the river. So there are only certain places I can get in, whereas anyone else can get in anywhere across the field, but I can't do it. So it's really simple things like that, but it's really nice to bounce off each other. And one of the things that's become probably most popular in the group is on a Sunday every week, we do a swim of the week post, and it's open to everybody to post a photo or even just a comment. But it celebrates absolutely everything. So it might be that one person has managed to get into the pool 2 times that week rather than once. They've not swum very far, but they've managed to get in twice. Or even that they've managed to get in once and they're recovering from something. And it goes from that to people that are swimming the English Channel and everything in between. But no matter what it is that the people that post have achieved, everybody celebrates it. So it celebrates all the small little wins on the way to big goals, which is, I think it's really lovely. And it's just turned into a really, really nice community and helped so many people. And that's the main thing for me, is I want swimming to become more inclusive and more accessible, especially open water swimming, because it's given me so much life and so much purpose in my life after my accident and things, that I want other people to be able to enjoy it as well.
So I've been on your group for probably 2 years or more, and one of the things that I've started to change as a swim organizer is this whole concept of swim briefings.
Yeah.
And more, I'm putting out the swim briefing in advance in written format, and so the people whose first language is not English, it's easier for them.
Yep.
And for all sorts of reasons in Kinsale and Cork, Ireland, we have a number of swimmers who have hearing issues.
Yeah.
And the worst thing is you get to your swim and there's a last minute change.
Yes.
And you scream out, no. Well, I said there was going to be a boy at corner one. There's not going to be a boy at corner one anymore, but you need to stay further away than normal because.
Yeah.
And this doesn't work, and it becomes a real safety issue. So
yeah,
we're starting to change that, and I noticed that one of our honor organizations, the Rottnest Channel Swim, where they have 300 soloers and 2,500 relayers, they're more and more doing a video ahead of time briefing with subtitles.
Yeah.
And that many people, somebody's going to miss the briefing in person.
Yeah.
The car got broken, they got an accident, they're delayed. So some things are changing in the wider world.
Oh, things are really starting. We've noticed in the past year or so, things have started to change, and people have become more aware that there are disabled people. And I think that's one of the things that the group has done, and also writing for the Outdoor Swimmer magazine and getting it, raising awareness through my swimming that I do. So the challenges I do. Is to show what people with disabilities can do if you give them the chance to and actually make it accessible. So I've had issues at race briefings. I don't have hearing impairment or vision impairment or anything, but as a wheelchair user, you quite often get shoved to the back of the group, and if you get shoved to the back of the group, you can't always hear what they're saying. So I've had events where I've gone in and actually it's changed, but I've not realized because I didn't hear, or they've had to give me a separate briefing, and having to have a completely separate briefing to everyone, it feels so awkward. And you just feel like you're causing issues. I now don't really care. If they've got to give it, it's because they've not done it right in the first place. But there are so many people, and it was me only a few years ago, who wouldn't speak up and would just sort of follow the crowd and hope for the best. But yes, last minute changes are not great. Last minute changes cause a lot of issues.
We interviewed an amputee maybe last year, a local guy from my area, and we had just finished the 2K swim down the river in Cork, and there's a long set of steps coming up, and I was at the top of the steps greeting people, and I saw him swim in, and I went, "Uh-oh, what do we do?" Because Julian has one leg, and I was nearly scrambling to go down the steps to help him. And as he got to the bottom of the steps, he reached up, and the organizers handed him his crutch.
Yep.
And I asked him later, I said, "Julian, like, how did that happen?" And he said, "I talked to the organizers months in advance. I explained my situation. I talked to them a week before. I talked to them before the event started. I put a crutch at the start and at the finish. And I thanked everybody profusely." He said, "I made the effort to make sure they were prepared for me." And I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. You have to be proactive. I mean, with a lot of swims that I do, especially when they're like mass starts and things, I start getting in before most other people. So I'm there ready to get in as soon, because it takes me slightly longer to get in. But one thing that I always do, I always contact the organizer first and ask them for details on what accessibility is, and if possible, photos, because then I can judge for myself, or a video. But one thing that's really, really helped me is when I get to the registration, I ask for a different color swim hat.
Okay.
So it means that everyone can tell that I'm me, And so I leave my crutches normally when I'm getting out. I leave them at the finish line. And they know when it's me that's coming in and that I'm going to need a little bit of help and what help it is I need, because they've been told by the organisers, when this person comes in this colour hat, please have the crutch ready.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, the majority of the time, that works really well. And it's such a small thing, and it can feel awkward in that you're in a different swimming hat to everybody else, so you're sort of almost singled out. But at the same time, it makes it safer and makes it easier, and it means you can actually get out.
Go ahead.
Sorry, you go.
So one of the surprises that I got, or one of the learnings I got a couple of years ago, was the connection sometimes of a physical disability with lower earnings.
Yes.
And it's something that never occurred to me. And that's why I was interested in. You mentioned that the Swimming Teaching Association helped you with the costs of your English Channel swim. Some of our more famous swims are getting more and more expensive. They're getting more professional, and the quality of boats, everything, like I'm not pushing the thing, but it's getting harder and harder for kind of normal people or people on reduced financial situations to afford these adventures.
Yeah, it's a real shame. It's something that I really struggle with. I'm having to now be very careful with which events I pick. And whereas I would do sort of 7 or 8 events a year, I now do 3 or 4 because it's just too expensive. With my channel swim, I was really lucky. I wouldn't be doing it if the STA hadn't funded it for me. So this year they do a campaign each year, and their campaign this year is called Starlight, and it's about shining a light on disability swimming. So it fitted in perfectly. And they've been absolutely fantastic, but they're upskilling teachers, so qualified teachers, to become specialist disability swimming teachers for free. So swim schools can apply, they'll train them for free. They go on this course, which means that more people with disabilities can join just ordinary swimming lessons. They don't need to go separate anywhere else or anything like that. They can just be with everybody else. But some of the money that I raise is also going to go towards training people with disabilities to become swimming teachers and coaches, to try and create more role models for women that have disabilities that are just trying to get into swimming, so that there are other people that are like them, that show that they can do what they want. But with the cost of things, I've had a few conversations with people, so especially when it's individuals with visual impairments, and they swim tethered to someone, and they've been told that they have to pay for the person that's tethered, not only the individual but also the guide as well. So for them to actually enter an event, they have to pay twice.
I can think of 1,000 swimmers that would put their hand up and say, "I will volunteer to be a tether person." I think, scream next time you're looking for somebody in the world to do it, and I will personally try to help you find them.
That would be brilliant. I mean, there's been several occasions. A lot of visually impaired athletes now use the headsets, and it's much easier. But there are occasions where it's just not suitable to use them, and people don't know where to ask. There is a Facebook group, I think it's called Blind Swimmers Buddies or something, and it's for people with visual impairments who can actually go, and there are other people in there that don't have visual impairments that are willing to become swim buddies and guides for the people with visual impairments. But some people with disabilities feel awkward asking all the time. They don't want to feel like a burden on other people, and they don't want to take away the fact that the person that they're swimming with might be faster than them, and so that person is then not going to come anywhere in the race where they might have had a chance to. And it's things like that. And actually, most people just do it because they want to swim, to be honest.
I can think of literally 1,000 people that have volunteered to be on somebody's crew in English Channel or otherwise, who really don't want to be in Dover for a week waiting for a window. who get in and be a support swimmer and do the most glorious freestyle motion while actually not pulling any
Not
water.
moving anywhere.
So the swimmer next to them isn't discouraged by seeing somebody do a one-fingered breaststroke.
I had that issue during my swim.
So I have a page on Open Waterpedia for people who've volunteered to be swim mentors for free.
Okay.
Let's talk about, maybe we need to put together a page for people that are willing to put their hand up in advance around the
That'd
world
be amazing.
and say, look, somebody wants some help on a day in, July next year, give me a call.
That would be amazing if we could sort that. Yeah.
Because
I
can tell anybody out there, when you help somebody to reach one of these goals, whether it's their first mile or something across the river, whatever, the smile, the beaming sense of satisfaction you get from the person, it's just better than anything else that week. You go, like, I made a real difference in the world. Didn't cost me anything.
No. So one of the people that is trying to improve access in terms of visually impaired swimmers is I think it's Melanie Barrett. She's just done a Lake Geneva relay, and I believe she's training for a solo channel swim next year, English channel swim next year. And she was the one that created the Facebook group and is trying to improve things. So maybe we get her involved as well. That would be really good.
So Sophie, I'm gonna stop the interview. Thank you very, very much.
Thank
the
you.
Swimmer who broke the record in the English Channel.
Thank you.
With some particular challenges. Let's leave it at that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much.
Take care.